Hello, Year 6. It's Mrs. Withers here with chapter 22 of Orphans of the Tide, which is called Missing Parts. Ellie sat slumped against a workbench, her hair a tangled mess of fingernails, chewed to jagged lines. In her hand was a cloth soaked in the sweat from her forehead. I don't understand, she moaned. This isn't how it's supposed to work. Finn refused to help me last night. How come I'm still getting weaker? Seth and Anna's eyelids were heavy from a lack of sleep. Anna went to get a fresh cloth. Seth rested his chin on his fist. Maybe you're still feeling the effects of the last wish you made when you saved us from that fall, said Seth. Ben noticed Ellie rubbing a shiny green and purple bruise on her arm. Did Hargraff do that? No, I bumped into a workbench when we got back from Celestina's Hope. In her mind, Ellie saw two struggling figures stolen away by hulking waves. Guilt tugged at her chest like a hook. She blinked hard and tore a hunk of bread from the plate Anna had put in front of her. She didn't feel hungry. The very idea of eating seemed unnatural, but she knew she had to keep her energy up. Her arms and legs were clumsy, brittle tubes. Her head was so heavy that it pulled her neck forward. Anna knelt at Ellie's side, dabbing her brow with a new cloth. On the floor was Hester Mayer's diary. Seth nudged it with his foot. What do you think was in those missing pages? He said. Anna glared at him, as if now was not the time to be asking such questions. Ellie forced down the bread in her mouth. It tasted like sponge. I don't know, she said, and I don't know how to find out. Seth took a deep breath. I think I should just turn myself in before anyone else gets hurt. You're not turning yourself in, said Anna, pressing a glass of water into Ellie's hands. But if I'm executed, then the enemy can't take a physical form, Ellie said, her voice cracking. You don't understand. Once the enemy gets out, once he's... She took another breath. Killed me. He'll murder and destroy. What if he got into the orphanage? It's not a he, said Anna, in a soft reprimand. It's an it. Ellie looked nervously at Seth. And then there's you. What about me? Finn knows what you are. He always has. And once he gets out, he'll want you to suffer, especially because you're like him, even though you're nothing like him, she added hastily. Trust me, I know what Finn's like. Stop it, Ellie, Anna said suddenly. Ellie looked at her in shock. What's the matter? It's not Finn, Anna said, fiercely crossing her arms. So stop calling it that. Finn was your brother. He was kind and sweet and never hurt anybody. Ellie looked at the floor. Sorry, she mumbled. The words, kind and sweet, circling her thoughts. She found it hard to think of him that way. You do remember him, don't you? Said Anna. Of course I do, Ellie snapped, and then closed her eyes. Sorry, it's just, well, my brother's dead. This Finn is real, and even though he's wretched and horrible, he's all I have left. Anna's lips went pale. That's a terrible thing to say. But it's true. Anna flinched and turned away from Ellie. Seth had started pacing the workshop, left and right, and left again, and Ellie found she wanted to snap at him too. She worried Finn was infecting her with his spite. Seth spun towards them. What if we left the city? He announced. Right away in a boat. The Inquisition would follow us, said Ellie. They'd take the whole Whale Lord ships and chase us across the sea. Not if they couldn't see us, said Anna eagerly. We could use the underwater boat. It doesn't work. Then we'll fix it, said Seth. Ellie laughed bitterly. I can't even fix one of those stupid crabs. She slapped the oyster catcher next to her. Then she coughed and coughed and coughed some more. She bent over and buried her face in both hands. We could go to one of the farming islands, Anna said, patting Ellie on the back. Seth frowned. The farmers would turn us in. But that map we saw yesterday. What map? Said Anna. In the stronghold. It had that city on it, and all the farming islands. But there were other islands too, far, far to the south, and one of them was big, even bigger than the city. Anna frowned. But the city is the biggest island. Not according to that map, said Seth. But if there were other islands, why would the Inquisition keep them a secret? Asked Anna. Seth licked his lips. Let's find out. We take a boat. At night, nobody sees us leave, and we sail across the ocean. The three of us can't cross the ocean in some tiny boat, said Ellie. We can if I'm in it, said Seth firmly. Finn will follow us. I won't stop being the vessel just because I'm not in the city. But there won't be any Inquisitors there to hurt you, Seth said eagerly. You won't have to make any more wishes because you won't be in danger. Ellie sat up, comforted by the determined look in Seth's eye. She imagined the three of them in some strange new land, where people smiled and the word enemy was never spoken in terror. But even if the people were cruel, and even if the ground was ash, it couldn't be worse than the fate that would find her in the city. Okay, she said at last, let's do it. Seth's eyes went wide in delight, and Ellie leaned on Anna's shoulder. Even the act of making a decision left her exhausted. Anna glanced eagerly around the workshop. Right, we'll need food and water, maps and a boat, she said, and we should take the rifle as well. Seth gave her a look. You know, just in case there are bears. Ellie found she was smiling and wasn't quite sure why. She felt a need to tell him how grateful she was, but wasn't sure what words to say. Instead, she looked down, and her fingers brushed the open pages of Hester Mayer's diary. Seth stopped pacing, watching her curiously. What is it? In this entry, Ellie pointed at the left-hand page. Hester Mayer suddenly starts talking about the enemy as if it is Peter, like they're the same thing. He doesn't seem to realise there's a difference. She frowned, biting her thumb. The enemy appeared to Hester Mayer as his best friend, and he appears to me as my brother. Maybe he always does that. It, Anna corrected. How do you think the Venomie chooses its vessel? Said Seth. I mean, it's not just random, is it? Ellie stroked her chin, while Anna stretched out on her front, flicking idly through Hester Mayer's diary. The enemy is a parasite, like one of those crook wasps that lay their eggs inside other insects, Anna read aloud. She looked up at the jars of dead animals on the shelves nearby. You don't have one of those crook wasp things in here, do you? She said. I'd love to see one. Seth knelt down next to Anna, reading the diary over her shoulder. Parasite, Ellie muttered. She'd pulled the oyster pearl from her pocket, rolling it about in her palm. Seth and Anna looked up. What was that, Ellie? Seth asked. He's a parasite, she said. It, Anna corrected. It's a parasite, said Ellie. It feeds off the host to grow strong, so it can break out on its own. But the enemy isn't a living thing. It doesn't eat. So what's it feeding on? Ellie winced as she pushed herself to her feet. Anna hopped up to help her. Thanks, said Ellie, tottering over to the many thousands of sketches on the wall, looking down a picture of a crook wasp. Maybe that's why he picked me, because there's something in me that he can feed on. Something that's not in you, he looked at Seth. Or you, she looked at Anna. Or anyone else. She stared at the picture a while longer, but her thoughts were thick like custard. She coughed, and Anna hurried over with a glass of water. How did Peter Lambeth die? Said Seth, still looking at the diary. Ellie hobbled over to him, sipping the water. I don't know, she said. Hester Mayer never says. Maybe that's what's in the missing pages, said Seth. Do you think maybe the way that he died was similar to your brother? Do you think he blamed himself for what happened to Peter, like you do with... Shut up! A stab of anger surged up through Ellie's body, and she hurled her glass at Seth. It fell short and bounced off a pile of books without shattering. The three of them stared at it as it rolled in a small circle. "I'm sorry," Ellie said, her eyes wide. "I don't know why I did that." The anger ebbed from her chest, replaced with a horrible shame. She sank to her knees. "I'm so sorry, Seth." Seth hurried over to her. "It's all right," he said softly. "It's fine. Really." "It's not fine," Ellie said, as Anna rubbed her back. "I'm so tired," she said, and she felt a sudden urge to cry. "Why am I so tired?" He didn't grant my wish." "We're going to find a way to stop it," said Seth. "We're going to find a way to fix you." Ellie frowned, staring at her hands. They were so pale, nearly the colour of fresh fish meat, apart from a few tiny brown freckles. She wondered if her brother's hands had been freckled too. She gave Anna and Seth a weak smile, and they smiled back, and then started chattering about provisions for the voyage. Ellie looked down at her ragged fingernails. She had a vague memory that someone had used to tell her off for chewing them, but couldn't remember who. Had it been her brother? She closed her eyes tightly and tried to think back, to remember him, the real him. But as she did, her chest turned painfully cold, and all she could see was his empty bed. How could they fix her? The only part she needed was gone. And we're going to finish it there for today.